Hi, this is Pat Moorhead, and we are back for the 6.5 Summit. We are in day one. We're talking cloud, and we're talking about two topics that warm my heart. You know, I love the hybrid multi-cloud, but I also love generative AI. In fact, I can't have a conversation lately with enterprise clients, the press, investors, without talking about these two. And I'm so pleased to welcome Shobhit and A from IBM, the IBM Consulting Group. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on. First time 6.5.
Thanks for having us here.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, probably a good place to start is we could talk about what the two of you do. Maybe AB, you can kick it off.
Sure. Hey, thanks for this opportunity. I'm AB. I go by the name AB. My full name is AB Vijay Kumar, obviously. I'm the CTO for Hybrid Cloud Services in IBM Global. I'm responsible for defining the overall hybrid cloud strategy, how we help our clients in coming up with the hybrid cloud strategy, how we help them transform and manage these hybrid cloud workloads. Lately, I've been extensively involved in trying to figure out how generative AI is going to transform, and trust me, it's going to change completely the way we work in hybrid cloud space. And it's been pretty exciting for me. I'm also an IBM fellow and master inventor. Really glad to be part of this session.
Thanks for coming on. Shobhit, how about
Hi,
you?
I'm Shobhit Varsheny. I'm a senior partner and VP in IBM Consulting. I'm accountable for all of our AI analytics and IoT edge business in US, Canada, and Latin America. And I get to serve clients across all the various industries that we serve. We do go through the entire gamut of deep learning, machine learning foundation models to doing a lot of work with unstructured content, document analysis, with some automation pipelines. We do a lot of work with computer vision, videos, images recognition with IoT. A lot of those are edge computes. Then we do a lot of work in the contact center space. We call that cognitive care, all aspects of touching a customer or an agent that's serving the customer. And across the entire spectrum of things, being IBM Consulting, we're an extremely open ecosystem. We have massive partnerships with AWS, Azure, Google's, IBM Watson's, and all the other niche players of the world. And it's been a great pleasure working with about 100 plus clients with generative AI in the last few months.
Wow, that's incredible. So again, two of my favorite topics, cloud and AI, come together. And the cool part is we have an IBM fellow and CTO, and Shobhit, you're serving clients just morning, noon, and night. How to help them get underneath this to really figure out how to unlock the power. I saw, I thought IBM Think was a really good expression of how the company is working in generative AI. And, I talked to a lot of your senior leaders and also some of your clients. And it's funny, it was so dominated by generative AI. I'm curious, and maybe Shobhit, we can start with you. How have your conversations been going? How have they changed since this phenomena hit us? I would say publicly 4 months ago. I mean, you guys built a complete AI supercomputer for these models, so it's not something that surprised IBM. But in a way, I think if we see the market cap of companies going up and down, if we see the conversations that I'm having, they're really off the rails. So how are your conversations changing?
The excitement is insane from our clients right now, and very cautiously optimistic about what we can do. It's just absolutely such a great time to be alive. There's just so much happening all at once. There's not a year in my entire career that I would rather be alive than 2023. Generally, the clients are very focused on productivity in 23. And when we look at generative AI, they're seeing a step change in how we can deliver the promise of AI and automation in the core workflows. Earlier, we used to spend a lot of time creating bespoke AI models for each task, whether it is reading a document, a contract, contact center analytics, or creating a chatbot, right? Now, going from those spectrum of different bespoke AI models, we now have this ability to take a massive, large model, adapt it for a particular domain with very, very little effort. The effort itself, we are seeing as a good reduction of 40 to 70% of the effort needed for certain NLP tasks is being really accelerated with generative AI. Over the last few months, we've had the pleasure and the honor of engaging with of more 100 different clients across a gamut of different industries. So obviously, each industry is at a different level of their maturity and who's experimenting versus delivering things with generative AI. But a lot of those today are focused towards looking at productivity gains, and it helps to have a human in the loop in these use cases, right? Because they are
Yes.
generating content, it's early in its stage. So a lot of the mid office, one office workloads, so things like procurement, re-engineering the whole process, knowledge management, end-to-end workflows in an organization, there we are focusing a lot with generative AI, and the results have been very optimistic right now. Where we see that it's delivering real, meaningful change in the way work gets done. AB, you're seeing a lot in the application space in the hybrid cloud. Do you want to share a few experiences on how clients are looking at it?
So hybrid cloud space, even before generative AI hit us, right? The focus as we work with our clients to embrace hybrid cloud strategies, the focus has always been an automation first kind of an approach. The approach is more in terms of how we can think as a platform. The platform consisted of infrastructure, which is code, application, which is obviously code, then security policies, and everything else is code. Now, with generative AI coming in with the capabilities that it brings to the table of generating code out of nowhere, this kind of, the automation is highly exponential if you really look at it, right? And some of the use cases, just for all of us to understand, is what we have been talking about is how do we use generative AI to generate architectures, for example? Think of a model where I can go and say, hey, can you give me a reference architecture of running, let's say, a web application on AWS? And imagine it generates the complete architecture for you. And I validate that architecture with a bunch of prompts. And then I would say, hey, can you generate a Terraform code or an infrastructure code out of this? And it generates it for you, right? And the beauty of foundation model based approach is I can take the base foundation model, train it for a specific client based on their enterprise architecture, so that the architecture and the platform code that is generated is very, very client specific. The other important use cases are migration. So we have a lot of code migrations, things like COBOL to Java, all this legacy code to the more modern cloud native programming languages. And trust me, the models that we have been using are so matured, they're able to generate almost 60 to 70%, sometimes 90% accurate code. So that's also helping us. And the third very important place is the operation side of it, where we are able to generate automation scripts, we are able to generate test scripts out of the code, generate documents of the code, or consume the documents and generate code out of it. So if you really look at it, the hybrid cloud space is going to completely transform the software lifecycle management itself is going to shrink drastically because of the generative AI, and the quality of the way we deliver is going to increase, right? And of course, there's this new way of working. Instead of now writing codes, I'm now writing prompts, what we call the prompt engineering, and then validating the code that is generated by the model before I put it onto production.
Yeah. So, Shobit, are there any specific applications that you're seeing out there? I mean, I'm sure there might be clients that want to, I don't know, give superpowers to what they're already doing inside of AI as an example. But what are you seeing?
So there are two categories of where we are seeing generative AI, and there's all the existing AI and automation that IBM and other clients have been doing with our different workloads. A quarter of the existing AI automation workloads are seeing a step change with generative AI. So, for example, reading documents was not new. We used to have NLP models to go do that. But the ease of what of we can do with these foundation models and the out of the box functionality is quite a bit of a step change. So I can give it a structure of a document and understand versus creating knowledge graphs and doing all the OCR and all the other steps for NLP. So a quarter of the current workloads are going to move over to generative AI and see a net change. And then there is net new use cases like content creation or summarization or code creation that
Yeah.
just did not exist earlier, right? So I think it's a combination of the two. It's an and approach. Given your existing workflow automation pipelines with traditional AI, that will include everything from analytics, machine learning, deep learning, and then this new era of generative AI, they're going to be working together in tandem to transform these end-to-end flows. So even when AB was giving you examples from the hybrid cloud, there's steps along the way that will benefit with generative AI. And the remainder of that, there may be some rule-based things, there may be some automation scripts that you will create. All of those are the existing work that we've been doing with our clients that get augmented with generative AI. So it's not a shift over or, hey, let's stop using our current chatbot and move over to a generative AI
Right.
based chatbot. It's going to be an and
Yeah.
approach. Certain workflows will work better for generative AI.
Yeah, it's kind
Yeah.
of the way all technology is, right? Like a lot of technology doesn't get replaced; it gets it's additive. So that totally makes sense.
And it's also the cost case, right? So generative AI is not really for everything, right? So there is a lot of ROI that we do even before we identify what is the best way of doing things, right? And the cost of creating or running a generative AI model obviously is much higher.
Exactly.
So the value is very important.
So I often get again. I By the way, I appreciate the detailed answers. The way that you're looking at this, it's evident and obvious to me. You've had some very hearty conversations with clients. Most of the conversations I have about this are kind of more ethereal than anything else. One of the questions I do get though is what's possible now with generative AI that wasn't possible before with AI, right? Hey, you got me all excited about AI, machine learning, and deep learning, and then we've got generative AI that comes out. What are some of the new types of use cases that it's creating?
I think let's try to talk about capabilities, and then we'll talk about technologies later. There are
Yeah,
four categories of capabilities that we are seeing that are a step change. The first one is around summarization, or pulling out key elements from a large body of knowledge, right? So this is things like given a complex document or calls in a transcript or an article or a regulatory compliance document, can I pull out the key elements that are relevant to this particular workflow? That's summarizing it or extracting key insights. The second is around conversational knowledge, the ability to ask an expert as a virtual expert, which has so sitting on top of a large body of knowledge bases across the enterprise, and have a back and forth conversation around all of that knowledge. This is like having an infinite capacity of a SME helping you in your workflow, and you're democratizing and automating that knowledge. The third category is around content creation. There's all modes of content. It could
yeah,
be video, images, large bodies of text, emails, articles, things of that nature. It could also mean synthetic data that's used for our traditional AI models. So there's a good yin yang relationship between generative AI can now generate the training data sets that can be leveraged in a model that is a traditional ML model. And the last one is around code co-creation, and that's what AB was mentioning around all our workloads in the digital and the hybrid cloud transformations. There's a net change of new capabilities around code creation. So now, if you combine those four capabilities, you look at a particular process flow in a customer's journey with a client. Contact center insights opens up a lot of possibilities where you can improve the quality of the existing chatbots. You can analyze the conversations between the agents and the end customers. You can automate a lot of the after call notes, going from a back and forth conversation into a crisp summary, understanding sentiment, updating your CRM system. All that after call note just evaporates. It's a very, very easy way of deploying generative AI. The same thing applies for if a procurement analyst gets an email with a quote, they compare the discount applied to the contract. That's a very manual, paper heavy process. We're seeing huge improvement in those kind of middle office workflows, contract intelligence, looking at everything in the communication space and marketing space, creating net new hyper personalized content. It's just been amazing to see how much brainstorming is happening across every organization, every line of business, legal, procurement, security, IT, marketing, all of them are combining their thoughts on what it can do with generative AI. Most of our clients are sitting on 100 plus list of high priority use cases that will deliver in quarter, in year benefits. And it's just been amazing to go through those and start to put those in production. AB, do you want to add
Yeah.
anything on the HCS
Yeah.
side?
So yeah, my experience, I mean, talking to the clients, obviously, extreme automation is one of the things, right? I mean, it's going to completely change the way we automate. Just to give you a use case and just to continue with what Shobhit was talking about, right? So, like, you have this chat-based way of fixing problems between in the engineers, right? I'm just giving you an example. So in that, think of it like a war room where the engineers are sitting and trying to fix a problem in production. Now we are able to take that chat and convert that into a Ansible runbook or an automation script, which was not possible previously,
Yeah.
right? And somebody was actually manually coding that. And another big shift I see is the knowledge automation. In my opinion, is a very big deal because uh, another example is I was working with a bank, right? And we were looking at, what makes sense for this bank from the generative AI perspective. One of the key places where they spend a lot of money is the audit and compliance documents that they create. And any audit exposure, any compliance exposure is a big issue, not just from the cost perspective, but also from the goodwill or from the brand perspective, right? And they have like millions of documents that are already there, and they rely on one or two very very strong auditors who write these audit reports. And they are pretty expensive, and they might make mistake. They might move out and somebody new comes. They don't know if that somebody knows the language of the bank, and that somebody has to go through these documents before they can write a formal report and all that. Now with generative AI, imagine, all of that is automated. So I'm able to train all the historical documents, and now generative AI is able to generate a document in bank's language, right? Which is almost 99% ready,
Yeah.
which just needs one SME to look at it before it goes out of the shop. While we are looking at automating some of the use cases that we already have, there is also this new avenues and new business opportunities that our clients are looking at, right? So they're ideating, saying, hey, is there a new business I can start as a bank, because I have so much of data here. How can I create a model? So slowly model is becoming a product. So they want to see, can I sell this product as a SaaS so that other banks can consume it and I can make money out of it? So these are all very new ways of thinking, right? If you really look at it, which means a bank is now thinking like a digital company. And what we used to talk about in the API economy world, now it is like, product, the data is the product kind of thing. So and it's I feel it's going to happen very big time, right? And of course it's also helping in terms of the how we are able to bring in a more precise. You must have seen the deep fake, the audio synthesis, the video synthesis, and all that, right? So the whole customer experience is going to change, in my opinion, right? So like, how you interact with basic things like Alexa to Google Home, to think of robots which are as real as humans, right, in their responses and all that, right? So that also opens up avenues in terms of having virtual banks and with better experiences rather than you physically going there and doing things, right?
So all this is great. I get really excited about it, and Shobit, I can go down the four elements that you talked about and apply my favorite open model to it. And I see a lot of great end products in the pipe for IBM as well. But it's funny. Most of the public conversation has been around these consumer applications, and IBM's application to this is very much enterprise or B2B2C, right? And I'm curious. We've seen some of the questions I get is, hey, how do we mitigate data and IP security issues? Because you got to plug this data in, and we're talking about client data, not the knowledge of the world that's out there publicly on the internet. And we've also seen hallucinations, right? Complete creation, like of a new narrative, history that doesn't exist. How do clients mitigate this?
Now, I think you bring up an extremely critical point. Responsibly deploying AI, whether that's generative AI or machine learning, deep learning models, that has been a very big focus for us and our clients. We serve our customers in very regulated industries. There's a lot of constraints around explaining auditability of the response and being able to track that and being unbiased. We've been running our own ethics board within IBM since 2018. We've had structures in place on both the governance side and all the tooling and processes that are needed to go deploy them across either for our own products or for our clients when you're engaging with them. So it starts by defining a process of the culture and the process around ethical AI and making sure that you're creating this responsibly. It's not a technology problem; it's a socio-technology problem when you're trying to do social responsible AI. There are lots of checks and balances, and when you start to look at, hey, AI is empowering a bank employee to make a decision on an application, you have to figure out the dynamics around that power grid and who has power over what or power to do something. So when you start looking at this in the generative AI space, now you're looking at another level of complexity where you're generating net new content that we have not seen before. So there are quite a few techniques that we are using to monitor and manage these foundation models. The overall area is called foundation model ops, FM ops. Just like we did ML ops with very structured outputs, we have a lot of tooling and techniques that are available to us for all the FM ops. So here you're trying to understand that if a new email was generated by a large language model, can you see if this email is drifting away from the baseline emails that a human produced? So the techniques in which you can take these, convert them to vectors, do some UMAP analysis, figure out how far this is from your existing baseline. So there are quite a few ways in which we are attacking the problem to do this in a very ethical way. Uh, AB, can you talk a little bit about what we're doing with our Watson X governance?
Yeah, so I mean, ethics is one of the very, very important topics in my opinion, right? So uh, let me spend a little bit more time on the FM ops. And by the way, we are using AI as part of FM ops also, right? So in terms of identifying, so the responses, see, first of all, it starts all the way from what is the data that you use to train the model, right? So is this data, are you infringing, or is it compliant to that particular industry? And this is one of the key problems or key questions that all of our clients ask. Hey, I can go ahead, use all these public models that are available, but I don't know if the code that is generated or the document that is generated, can I just copy paste it and use it, right? So legally, can I do that? Is it commercially viable for me to do that? Second big problem is, okay, now I am feeding this foundation model that you gave, which is publicly available, with my data. How can I ensure that nobody else is going to use it, right? Because it's some of the, like, the same bank, they're feeding all this audit data, and it could be confidential, right? So one is the control, the governance and control of what is the source of the data and how are you training the model with the data, right? So that is the first step, which help which we have to focus on. The second, obviously, is once it is trained, and that's where I think Shobhit was talking about the response that is generated by the FM model, right? So how close is it to the trained model, right? And how is it evolving over a period of time? And obviously you keep streaming more and more data into it, because it is going to be like what we did in ML ops. In FM ops, what we do is, it is a continuously trained model. It's not like, I trained it 1 year and I'll use it for the rest of the years, right? So you might have to keep updating, because the compliances changes, the use cases changes, and everything else, right? So as you feed the data again, you keep looking at, how it is learning. Is it taking a different direction, to Shobit's point, and should I control it back in a different way? Should I fine tune it further, and all that, right? So as part of Watson X governance, it allows you to have that end-to-end view of, how the data is flowing across this stream, because it kind of keeps tab of, as you have seen the Watson X architecture, right? There are three main pillars, right? You have AI, data, and then the governance, right? All of these kind of feed into governance, and governance becomes like the central auditor, if I may use that word, right? Of what is really happening, and keep a check of what's happening and all that. And of course, you can customize the way you want to govern, how tightly you want to govern and things like that. But so that's what we are doing with Watson X.
That's excellent. Hey guys, this is the cloud track for the 6.5 Summit, and I think we should. I think good question to talk about is how do generative AI and the cloud intersect as it
Oh yeah.
relates to what you're advising clients or how you're looking at this.
Yeah, I can say there is no generative AI without cloud. Okay, because you will need that kind of a resource, right? So I mean, we are talking of, let's say, you want to build your own model. We are talking of resources, GPUs that you need from around 10 million to 100 million, depending upon the size of the model, right? And it's not possible for you to stand up a data center just like that and create a model. And cloud has been um, um, expanding or giving that elasticity that you need to really build this model, right? So the building of the model is one piece of the puzzle. The second piece of the puzzle is, once you build the model, you have to host the model somewhere. And typically it's not like, in an enterprise, every business unit will have their own models, right? So there has to be a governance in terms of who is creating. It's not like application code management. The model management is slightly different, like I said, all the governance that we were talking about in the previous question, right? Now, mostly most of the clients we are talking to are talking of generative AI as a platform which is
Right.
hosted in a private cloud or a public cloud or a dedicated cloud, but it's going to be on a cloud as a SaaS solution that can be used internally by all of their business units and centrally controlled, mainly because of the ethics and the audits that they do on top of it, right? um, the second very important part is, so it's not just enough you have a model, right? You also need a layer on top of it, which basically, it's not like you create one model for one enterprise. So you will have a
Right.
large LLM model for something, you have a code generation models, you have models which generate documents specific to audits and things like that. It's not like one big model that you run, right? And then we also have models which might run on your on your phones, right? For example, right? So you need a centralized platform which manages this end-to-end life cycle of the model, and also provides you a layer on top of it where you can have a library that you can store all your prompts on, right? Because now the new way of coding is prompt engineering, right? So we stopped doing writing code, we started writing prompts now, right? So but typically, if you look at the life cycle of generative AI based life cycle software life cycle management, you start with identifying the model, and then you start writing those prompts. This is typically a very senior SME who creates this prompt template, what we call, and then they store it in a library. We call that guy a prompt engineer or a librarian, right? And then once it is stored, the others can actually use those prompt templates to actually run it on the model to generate code or document or whatever, right? Uh, so you need that platform, right, which allows you to store your prompts, to choreograph between multiple models, to govern, to do this overall end-to-end management and all that. So IBM Watson X obviously provides you that layer, right, which allows you to do the end-to-end lifecycle management of the model. And more importantly, it also allows you to have your own models, right? So there is a concept called bring your own models. It's not like, oh, you have to use only IBM models on Watson X, right? So it allows you, we already are partnering with Hugging Face, and you can bring
Right.
models from Hugging Face to host on that, right? And internally, we also have an accelerator, if I may use that word, called Essentials Toolkit, which we have created, that is helping our developers, our engineers, to generate code from legally, commercially okay models, right? So we can't be using, for example, Bard or GPT or public
Right.
models to generate a code and copy it for our clients, which is ethically not okay, right? Because commercially you're not supposed to use that, right? So internally we have a sandbox that we have created, which is generated with our own IP and all that, right? So So these are the two strategies that we are going after.
No, I appreciate that. Great answer. It's exactly what I expected. Shobit, any comments on the cloud generative AI, the types of conversations you're having?
So I've been very encouraged by how thoughtfully all the major cloud vendors are bringing generative AI to enterprises. Azure,
Yeah.
Google, AWS, IBM, all of them are very focused on AI safety, on lineage of the documents, making sure that there's provenance if you're doing a search, things of that nature. One of my big clients is a life science company, global. They have data in Europe that has to stay there. And they may have
Yeah,
Google for some of the documents. They may have AWS for others. So for most of those clients, we are following the data gravity and we're respecting where the data needs to be. So if you are on AWS and you have all of your legal documents there, it makes sense to use AWS Bedrock to go fine tune a model and deploy it right next to where the data is. Otherwise, the ingress charges will be quite a bit. So same goes on Azure and Google. So I see this as a hybrid cloud deployment model where over time you would have access to data where it resides. You would build models close to where they are, and cloud vendors like Google will make it super easy for you to say, "Here's your Google Drive. I'm going to create a copilot against it." That functionality will be something that they will create to make it sticky for people to continue to use their clouds. So over time, we see that hybrid cloud, the size of the models will vary. In certain cases, just the massive large language models like GPT-4, Palm 2, Cloud are just absolutely stunning. They're beautiful the way they work. I'm super impressed by the quality of the output we get from there. But a lot of our use cases will require medium-sized models that are more fine-tuned when the high volumes come in. You may start experimenting with GPT-4. You may then move down to a more medium-sized
Yeah.
model that's fine-tuned for that, but the model's distilled down. So the compute power is going to be low. As part of our engagements with the clients, we announced a 1,000 people generative AI COE.
yeah,
It's now we have trained SMEs with generative AI, certain use cases that AB was talking about, and they have access to all the tools that we are building to empower them to go deliver for our clients. That reduces the time to value. So, as an example, I'm working with one of our large CPG clients where on a daily basis, we are looking at all the architectural choices from all the different cloud vendors on how to responsibly, securely deploy these models. You could go from something like fully hosted and managed externally by a third party. Those could be applications, SaaS applications, like if um, if we're using Bard or ChatGPT or Midjourney. The next one down could be there's a model that's provided by the cloud vendor. So, for example,
right.
Azure take the OpenAI model, move it to their cloud on their infrastructure, give you a private endpoint. One more secure from there could be a fine-tuned model where you're adding your enterprise data, and now Azure will make a copy of that, move it into your private cloud. Now you have a copy of that running on your compute. Or you could take a model from Hugging Face and say, you know what, I don't want to use my cloud's vendors AI layer. I just want to use compute infrastructure, or I could put it on-prem. I could take a
Yeah.
BART, BERT model, fine-tune and deploy it behind my firewall as a local endpoint. Or I could go to the extreme and say, I'm going to go create a model from scratch. IBM, we're doing this for clients like Moderna and NASA, where we're building from scratch, ground up, very custom built models for that particular domain. So I see this whole spectrum of how we go to market and help the clients. And these 1,000 generative AI SMEs across all the various AI cloud vendors, with all the tools that AB talked about, with use cases that we're delivering for 100 plus clients. And that combination is what's driving the growth for IBM Consulting in this space.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the 1,000 folks in your center of excellence. And I also know that other consulting firms are just getting around to forming this. So I was shocked to see that number come out. I think, but it's kind of classic IBM. I mean, you guys help clients get to the next big thing, help them for lack of a better term, get them, enable them to do things with their data that they never thought they could do. Or if they thought they had an idea about it, getting them there with the technology to do that. And I do think that full stack capability gives IBM an advantage in this space. So,
Mhm.
gentlemen, a great conversation on how enterprises should be looking at generative AI. And being in the consulting group, I mean, you're right there on the literally at the front of the process of how this happens. And I think that's exciting. And it is also fun to see. I've spent time with your cohorts that, through the value chain are delivering many of these technologies through that new Watson X stack if they want it, but also working with other public cloud providers if that's the best way for the client to go. So I want to thank you very much for a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks. So this is Pat Moorhead talking cloud and generative AI with the IBM Consulting folks. Stick around. We've got a lot more action here in day 1, and stick around for day 2 and day 3. And if you can't sit in front of your computer for 3 straight days, you can just pick the video that you want to go after, press the play button as long as you're signed up, and get all that awesomeness. So good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are on the planet, and thanks for tuning in.